Suprabhat slash good morning to everyone from India. This is Vardhan from Indus Think, and here we have the third episode for season two of Indus Think. We have analysts from the last discussion that we had, second last discussion, which is episode 17 on on cultural salience, which I had with the Opinion Bakery, Akshay, GV Shivkumarji, Machiavellian Hindu, and I don't remember one more person, maybe if I'm missing out. But frankly speaking, it was a great discussion, and I think let's proceed with this one to conclude the chapter on Indic salience. So, in the last discussion, what we did was that we had basically discussed across various understandings about modernity, the challenges that we face due to modernity, and of course, when we talk about civilizational renaissance in the true sense, how should it turn out? So there was an interesting thread by G. Shivkumarji. So G. Shivkumarji, let me introduce him. He is currently he's an IT professional, but he's also a consulting editor for Indic Academy. And we also have Machiavellian Hindu. He is very much Machiavellian as he seems to be, as he aesthetically feels to be. If you look at his avatar, but anyways, so let's go on to the main aspect before so that we can begin and complete this chapter. So one thing which I really liked about that thread which was shared by GV Shukmarji on Twitter was about countering, not just countering institutions, but basically coming up with practical institutions. So let me share that diagram which I had made in reference to that, and then I think GV Shukmarji can elaborate upon it, and based on then we'll actually address two interesting questions. One is about when we talk about Indian civilization or Bharatiya civilization, we generally have an idea of trusteeship, which is very interesting, which is not really like the master servant relationship or the principal agent relationship in other civilizations, but it's something which is quite different in general. Now, of course, the concept of trusteeship comes in Deen Dayal Upadhyay's conception of Antyodaya and even other ideologues and young thinkers, but let's cut it short and let me share that particular diagram so that the idea of the thread which was discussed on Twitter is explained. And I think Jeev Shukmarji can elaborate further because, of course, it is his thread. It's just that I have improvised it upon and made a diagram. So I'm just sharing the screen, and I think then I can explain, show it particularly. So I think now it is visible. So this is the
Well,
particular pick, and I think Jeev Shukmarji can focus on it and uh, elaborate upon it. So
Yeah, I've been talking about this all the time, so
yeah.
I will. The industrial dynamic is extremely close to my heart. I'll just take a step back and explain where I place the industrial dynamic too. So there are three things that are happening in the in today that is causing turmoil in the system, and it's not today; it's last 300 years. The first is, of course, we went through a colonial era, but that is something. So if many things happened in that era. The first thing was that there was a conflict with monotheism, which is continuing to run. Second, certain monotheistic cultures transformed and I would say metamorphosized into their own modernity with a capital M, where their old world continues to exist, and though that modernity has further stretched itself into all modern institutions. So, and it serves a lot of ideological and conceptual structures that guides today's world, whether we like it or not. And through modern education, all of us are imbibing that, and without knowing what is the impact of that. The third dynamic is the industrial dynamic, which is also, you can say, it's a cultural progression of the West, but nevertheless, that is the dynamic that significantly changes the life in India, because we may uh, we may have certain protective structures and engagement with the two big M's, but The industrial dynamic is of a totally different nature. What it does to us is important that we need to see. First is that it is, on the one hand, placed a higher premium on material in our life. So it has instruments to create a lot of material, and it has a way to convince us that that much material is required for us in the modern world, in today's world, or it is not just today's world, at any point in time, that much material is very, very essential. And by material, I'm generalizing, there's a lot of stuff into that. Second thing is its ability to create material is of such pace and speed that it cannot, the old social organizations, it is significantly disrupting. And in the case of India, all material creation and all professions were within the concept of a community. So the community created entire lifestyle around a profession, which was very central. And that resulted in ensuring that the material creation and consumption was well tempered, sustainable, regenerative, whereas the modern world's speed of creating the material requires that that community organization is totally disrupted, because the speed of creation it requires that the individual loses a degree of association with the community, increases a degree of association uh, with the industrial world that is outside of the community for the first time in Indian life in the last 300 years. Three, it creates a space for what the community earlier provided within. It needs to happen now outside in a public space. So a lot of community life has shifted to public space where the individual is supreme. And it, because of this complex dynamic, it requires that the state be stronger and manages the dynamic between the community state and the community industry and the individual, and that is the public space, so that certain balance is maintained. And we all have a different opinion on what should be the nature of that state, but that is not the focus of my thing here. So my thing is to place the fundamental nature of industrial dynamic, and in the way it alters our life, and the crisis it creates in Indian life. The crisis it creates is that the Purushartha organization was around a community and as a network of communities. So India was always a network of communities, which was overseen. The order of the network was overseen by the state. So the state did not have to be very strong. Because of that, it needed to sufficiently focus on security, justice, and the order of and the communities. Decided the nature of the network, and nodes and edges, and nature of the nodes, nature of the edges, and so on and so forth, and evolved its own mechanisms to manage that, which the state, which the king need to manage. And any excessive welfare was taken care by the state, and for all special needs, excellence was aristocracy. So you had scholars, poetry from every field. They could step out and become some sort of aristocrats, but continue to be affiliated with their communities. So the aristocrats did not have the kind of power that today the elite has, because today the elite has become a because the state is strong. There is a stronger elite that has gotten formed very close to the state. So on and so forth. So this change is occurring now. Now this has created a conflict in in the reformists, and people who want to ensure that the communities continue the way they were in the past. So, the traditionalist argument of, the community life, that does not hold good anymore, because with professions gone out, there is a fundamental change that has occurred. And the centralists, or centrists, or statists, or reformists will need to know that, uh, while they clearly understand the nature of the crisis created by the two M's, and the uh, modernity, monotheism, and the industrial dynamic. No, they don't understand that if a reimagination is not purushartha centric, then you will just gradually become secular as a country. So while this crisis is well understood by the traditionalists, they don't understand that the professions are already gone. So there is a different equilibrium that we need to imagine between the state, the public space, the aristocracy, the elite, and the modern industry, and the communities. A new set of institutions are required in to buffer this complex engagement, and we have no idea what those new set of instrument engagements are. The centrists are good in imagining the right state, but they have no idea about what kind of internal institutions are required over and above communities and industry, and the emerging public space, and so on and so forth. While that is in the realm of the traditionalists, but they don't want to agree that the communities of the past cannot continue just as they were. So this is the predicament of the Indic civilization, the way I say it. And of course, the players, there is an entirely another different segment of seculars. They will continue to imagine this universe in a wholly different manner. So I'm limiting my discussion to the Indic world, and the conflict within the Indic world, and how we're all, we're all, each of our position is legitimate. We should not deny the legitimacy of any of our position, but each is refusing a certain amount of legitimacy to the other side, which is actually harming the discourse. This is my view. Thank you.
So, as far as this diagram is concerned, I had added the point where I should say that the state should act as a limited and adaptive regulator. Now, why did it do so? I'll tell afterwards, but I wish that Machiavellian Hindu first gives the comments, and then I will explain why did I say that. Yeah.
So the industrial dynamic, as Shiv Kumar Mahoday has explained, it has been in existence since the last 300 years or so, which is, of course, corroborated easily by history. And what I have to say is that as he spoke about the positions of so many people, they are all legitimate, but they fail to see past each other. This reminds me of Arnold Kling's three axes of oppressor oppressed, liberty coercion, and civilization barbarianism. There are three axes. So what happens is that all these three axes don't really have any kind of an intersection here at all, because nobody is really thinking of looking at the other's viewpoint, that it comes from a different place, really. So in this way, there's just no cooperation possible at all, and that does affect the community in one way, because some seek something and some seek something else. So this way, the community is hard to make. So the industrial dynamic has made it this way, because the industrial dynamic ensures leisure for everyone as such, because of the speed with which stuff is created, and because of this we have so much of leisure possible in our time. Otherwise, if you look at the older times, you had to work a lot, and because we worked a lot, that's why uh, it was divided in so many people. Not everyone had the leisure to rule. That's why democracies, oligarchies, they were not really prevalent as much in India. Only in the ancient times they were, and in ancient times It was that everyone could, as such, afford leisure in those smaller scale states. And it's also corroborated in Greece that things were small at that time. And as we have also seen, our communities were also localized by Desh and other criterion. By Desh, Gram, Nagar, there were many ways this way, but they were all still not really as expansive as is the subcontinent today. Now, as far as the state goes, I would now as far as the Purushartha goes. Now, the thing is that Earth and Kam are more emphasized in this age than in any other age. This is also seen in reality, and Dharm, unfortunately, has been at a very has been on a back foot here. It's not really something which has kept up with Earth and Kam's increase. As Aristotle has also explained in his Politics, that when a part of the state grows too powerful, it can end up changing the entire structure of the state. It's just like a body. That in a body, if you have an equal increase in all parts, it looks good. But if one part of the body increases more than all the others, then the body looks grotesque. And in this way, we have seen that uh, the industrial dynamic has caused such a state with our society, that some parts have grown too fast, much faster than all the others. There's no uniformity here at all. That some parts have never kept up with things. And in this way, such has happened with the industrial dynamic, and which has affected our communities and all. And all the thing is that there are two worlds existing together, and they are in conflict, really. The modern world, which makes you act in a certain way so that you can gain prosperity, because any other way of acting is not going to ensure it easily unless you had a stronger structure with a community which has power with you. So you could stay glued to the community and still gain. Some are here in our entire Indian subcontinent set of communities which can do that. The others cannot. The others have to break free from the community. The community has to loosen up to allow this, and uh, so that everyone can prosper. And then there's another thing, that the Nagar itself is very different, much more different than it may have been in the old times, because the Nagar is where everyone goes to seek prosperity. It's not really something which trickles down to much smaller units, unlike maybe in Europe or other places which are rich. And there, it's just not, and there you can still have leisure as well as prosperity. But otherwise, it's just not something that I suppose is going to be easy to sustain in India unless you are having some kind of privilege that has been passed down to you or something. And so, with regard to this, this is what I have to say. That will be all.
One point you mentioned is interesting about the need to work hard and the leisure and the time and so on and so forth. But that seems to be a little counterintuitive because in India we've had a lot more festivals being celebrated by communities and families
Mhm,
throughout the year. And today, in the modern world, in spite of all our leisure, we are not able to, if the statement is true that there is more leisure, we are not able to do that. We are not able to give our mind share. It could also be argued that since the life was within the community, festivals were
mhm,
integrated into that, and people even while they stretched to work hard, they could continue to celebrate their festivals because the disharmony between your performances and your general life was not very high. That's one way to put it. But
mhm,
it can also be that the industrial dynamic actually is making, on the one hand, theoretically it has the ability to create more leisure for us.
mhm,
Actually, our love for the dynamic itself may it may be sweeping us away, and due to which we may be performing a lot more than required, and we do not have sufficient leisure to do anything else. So there may be
Uh,
a contradictory situation over here, the contradiction between the promise and the reality.
yes, there is a bit of it, and more so in our times. Maybe one could say that in the times of the boomer generation, so to say, in America, it's said that they could do without a university education, and also if they did, university education was cheap. In the 20s, you could have a household, you could have a wife and children. It's much harder today. Indeed, this way, indeed, we can say that it's much. There is a discord between promise and reality. Yes.
Yeah, 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 that's true.
Great. So I will try to address those points in continuation, and I will, of course, address why did I mention that the state should act as a limited and adaptive regulator. So let's come on the part of the state as a regulator in a sense, and then let's get on the point of leisure. What is my view particularly? And there's nothing as a contrarian view. I would say there's much of a constructive view here to add up to
Mhm.
things because I tend to be realist, but not a brutalist because you can be one, but you don't need to be the other. So, and at all, you don't be. I think there's a difference between them, but it's just that people just see it in a stereotypical way. But anyways, when I say as far as this particular conception is concerned from the thread on Twitter, and people can go at the thread. The link is already given below. They just need to type it out. I understand there are a lot of numbers there, but anyways, um, when I say that the state should act as a limited and adaptive regulator, what happens is that after partition, as our laws developed, and of course there were colonial and post-colonial dilemmas with those particular laws, what essentially happened was that we were of course down with the efforts and we were trying to anyways fit in our conceptions into the of course incumbent framework of those times. Now the problem was that we saw with the Hindu code bills that it did not work pretty well. Of course, for the in case of other faiths, of course, it's a different story altogether. I'm not getting on that at all. But for us, it did not work in that sense completely. Yet, we see in the section 2 of the Hindu Marriage Act that we do not define who is a Hindu. We say that these included are exactly the Hindus. But of course, that's not a good way to do so because traditions matter and communities have their own practices, which is, of course, intra and inter. And I completely understand that. I think one thing which comes in is that for the colonizer, it was more of a like a tool. So what happens is that uh, for them, a top-down state is the epitome of many things. But I think I'm not sure if for a modern state, and I'm removing the ID part right now, which is industrial dynamic, for assuming whether cultural generation and cultural regeneration. I'm not talking about cultural degeneration because there is some cultural degeneration which anyways happens because of industrial dynamic, and it happened in the West in their own way because we even see so-called traditional communities of Christian and Islamic nature who actually say, okay, fine, ये हमारा tradition था, लेकिन तुम लोगों ने industrialization कर दिया, so we don't accept that. There are many people who support, for example, the Republican Party in the US or the conservatives, or who basically were in the old times of Wahhabism. So let's now get on to the contemporary times. So of course that change happened, and from that what we learn is that of course many people of course had certain resistance to it. So the state, what does it should do is that, since, and I'm considering the development of international cultural law plus the development of public policy, is that the best way the state can act is that of course it should not intervene too much and should not be the fountainhead of these policies, because simply we know that the state does not have the gamut to do so, and that is the real position. However, when I say limited and adaptive, I think the state can therefore play a very good role in public policy by delineating, and I would say, quote unquote, decolonizing the spectrums of cultural assets. When I say cultural assets, this simply means your ethnicity, your identity, your jati, varna, etc., etc. Don't need to get too much deep into it. Otherwise, cancel culture and everything is there. So I'm not interested in that, but let's get on the main point of it. What I'm trying to propose is that If you are limited in a limited sense to regulate certain aspects so that cultural autonomy is achieved, it actually comes down to the communities and therefore the institutions to go for the mechanism of self regulation. And self regulation can happen at various levels. It can happen in economics. We already know companies influence markets. We already know that institutions influence education policies. So, yes, that is definitely possible in India. In fact, that is something which happens. How it has happened is something I'm not going to propose because, of course, every community and institution has their own way. If you even change it from a language perspective, I don't think they will, the approach to democratize will be the same. Of course, there will be certain nuances and practices involved. So I think since I analyze the malpractices of digital marketing and digital technologies, I look at from a point that there is some contamination in the part of, I'm not going to use the word metaphysical, the cyber part of things. For example, let us say, because that's what the end goal of the industrial dynamic has been. So in that regard, I think self-regulation is something which institutions would need. And as far as linkage is concerned, I think um, it will be more about, maybe let's say there's a community. So I'm just assuming an example. Let's say there's a community X in a particular region in India, which of course has tried to retain certain aspects of its culture. Of course, there are certain aspects of its culture which are not available, which are like completely gone, or something like which are like become museum culture. They are stored somewhere, they're documented somewhere, but they don't know about it. So I think best way for those kind of communities also is to say, okay, fine, jo hai wo to bachana hi hai. Let us see how we can regenerate it, learn the past pretty well, keep analyzing it, and then let's see how much regeneration of the cultural paradigm, like how we can create a new stream out of it. So I'm like taking an analogy for fun only from from that particular movie after Infinity War, where what happens is basically there's a scene that, there are six Infinity Stones, they break up, there's a break of timeline and all of that. So let's say that a timeline broke up and you want to create a new timeline of cultural continuity. If you wish to do that, I think this is something subject to specific circumstances. And I think self-regulation, if it's the case, then I think communities can pretty well do it. But they should, of course, rediscover their past pretty well. I'm not getting on political advocacy. We know what it is. People do it pretty well. And that is something which is a question of hyphenation. But I think a proper decolonization method for communities will be to delineate and detach the feudal political problem, which actually makes them murkier. Because we know why political assumptions in India cause a lot more problems and harm to not just even culture and community and faiths. It also causes problems to our education approaches or our innovation practices. Like I can tell so many mediocre things about, like how innovative practices on having certain good initiatives have been blocked due to political efforts by basically saying that, what, this is not good, and so forth. But it does not work actually, and of course it does not have any meaning. So this is why I said that it should be an adaptive and limited regulator, because of course if we say the state is the fountainhead, then we go to the problem of the top-down problem, which is to say whether the law is perfect or not. But again, it depends. And I think the state is not good at that, because there is no good research also, nor there is an analysis of how the policy affects legally. And of course, now that the implementation is skewed, so what happens is it becomes a feudal thing. It's a policy limbo. और कुछ होगा तो of course implementation नहीं होगा तो community को उतना फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा. But then in the eyes of the law, it is something weird. So we have to, I think, deal with that. As far as the question of leisure is concerned, which is very interesting, I think it's something which I completely agree with Jeev Shukmarji in my Hindu. And I think on that, I think I consider that while while there is a sense that people are not able to basically talk to each other in much sense, we need to understand that people need to very well analyze what policy or perspective they should. And of course, they can not force it completely, but they can analyze it one by one, and they can then say, okay, fine. They can come up with two questions to take up, and then we'll go on the portion of trusteeship of Indic civilization. Of course, two questions. Acha, one question hai, which is by Amrita. So, congratulations to Amrita for his Project Bharata podcast. I wish that he discusses a lot about Indic history, AIT, OIT, etc. Completely his job to do so. I think he is very well at that. So, congratulations to him. Let's take the question from Amrita. So he says, and I think this is for Jeevish Kumarji maybe. When we speak of revival, evolution, taking forward of anything quote unquote indic, comma, to what degree can we and should we first try to identify the original form? Uh, I would like to comment on this, but after G. Vishwakumarji and Makhindu comment. So, yeah.
Okay, that's an important question. I think there is no original form in the physical sense because every 100 years it has changed and it keeps changing and it has so much changed that I don't think any of us can exactly say how the form was 1,000 years back. We should do that. I mean, I'm not saying that modernity has instilled in us a penchant, a curiosity for forms as well. We will not be able to abandon that. We will have to, and indulge in our performative experiences and joys in figuring out the form. We have to do archaeology and everything else. We'll have to do that. But I don't think we should be lost in that. What we need to, more important, we need to appreciate that the form has always changed. And there is enough research on that. People who have studied some Kannada texts in the 12th century, 11th century, 10th century have been astounded with the absence of any discussion on Varna. So, and that may still mean nothing because just because there is no mention or discussion of it doesn't mean on the ground that reality was not there. So we cannot make drastic conclusions through that. But what is certain is that there is an essence that has carried forward, and there is a philosophical concern, not just philosophical concern. There is an integrated view of the material and the sacred that we have constantly, strived for. And there are certain things that we have always strived for until 1800, until let's say, the Marathas were defeated. We have always strived for some things. Those things we should continue to strive for, and there is reasonable agreement in what we strive for. We strive for the philosophy is very clear, cutting across that it is the purushartha that is common, you know, and purushartha is not a small thing because within the four concepts and the interrelationships between them, it contains a huge philosophical and material world. And there are other things, it's not just that one thing. So there are, I mean, uh, there are certain uh, a complex a complex of around 200 concepts really captures the essence, which really is able to build multiple forms of civilization, multiple views, so on and so forth. So what they strived for, if that is very clear, then it is possible to indulge in the reimagination. Otherwise, if we strive to find the original form, then I'm assuming Amrit meant that. Then I don't will be lost forever in that. So anything that we strive for would still need to be what we build for the future, because nobody will wait for us to figure out the form. Until then, much more ground is to be lost. Other dynamics will keep on shifting the ground, and you will never ever catch up. So I would say, there was a certain organization at a high level. It's clear, how our organization was. Cannot be each node, each edge may not be clear. But what is the structure of the society? What is the nature of the kingship was very clear. Who are the operating elements in between was also clear. We knew democratic processes, but we also knew not to take it to the excess. The Uttaramerur inscription clearly demonstrates that that level of sophistication is not possible if you did not understand, you know, uh, a democratic process properly. But still, they did not cross the line because they knew that the the promise of democracy can easily be compromised by the process of democracy. So, and they knew how to not subjugate one to the other, and the modern world is caught in that. So, I think from the integrity of the material and the sacred, and different aspects of life being bound by dharma, I think there is enough clarity. What is not clear is, given the fact that there are there are new dynamics. I mean, these dynamics may still have existed in the past, but we are experiencing it for in the recent in our own ways. How do we reimagine that balance? Whatever it was, I mean, the fact that the professions are gone means that there is a new imagination that is needed, and whatever clarity in the form that we want to achieve of the past, you have to achieve by only focusing on the future, building something, erring, faltering, correcting, so on and so forth. So the focus ought to be from whatever understanding we have. What are the new institutions that are required? We need to craft a new state theory, which is a Purushartha state. We do not know. So the questions, all the questions, Abhivardhan, that you raised, that the communities, self-regulation, and state as a whatever facilitator, all that will come later. The first thing has to be to imagine ensuring that all players are imagined. There are 8, 10 players, and what is the dynamic of each of those, which can be controlled, which cannot be controlled, which cannot be self-regulated, which needs state also needs to self-regulate, state also needs to regulate something outside, industry also needs to self-regulate, industry also needs to regulate outside. But what is the philosophical construct that we will use to hand over this self-regulation and the inter-regulation? Can we look at industry as another node, just as a community, and reimagine the network of communities? We do not know. So there is a lot of architectural reimagination and statecraft reimagination, theory of state reimagination, that needs to happen with the philosophy that we already know. So we need to bring that to the table, and that discussion is not happening right now. Everybody is killing each other through their own strawman, and that's not good.
Okay. So I have one more question. And as far as my comment is concerned, I completely agree with you. And uh, I'll just put a little bit on this, and then of course there's one more comment on YouTube. We'll take up that so that we go ahead, because I think with that comment we can steer to the discussion on trusteeship. So okay, I completely agree on this portion, because I think even defining who are the parties to whatever status quo has been is something which is not done
Mhm.
yet, which is
Yeah.
the same problem as कि वही local community का है, that the local community can, for example, let's take that example forward. Let us say वही same local community, अच्छा ठीक है भैया, हमारा ये community है, हमारा इतिहास है, हमारा ये वो है, हम ये करते थे, हमारी language है, very good. The whole thing is, are you interested in creating a timeline? But before all of that doing, because the reason I said self-regulation is that because this has been a thing for communities always, and I think for pagan communities like us also, because I think after you mentioned the Kannada inscription, as you're saying, and I would be more interested to have a discussion with you and certain people who are interested in, not saying that India was a democratic state, but like India had democratic values. वो ethos था, what was it?
The
I think we
thought
should have
was
a, yeah, the ethos was.
Yeah.
that universe familiarity was there.
Hmm. We can say that
Yeah.
exactly. Like, let's not say democracy, let's say democratic ethos. That's better. वरना फिर वही
Yeah, and
distortion
it's a
होता है, and then
Tamil
we,
inscription. Uttiramerur is a
yeah.
place in Tamil Nadu.
Okay,
Mhm.
that's great. Thank you so much. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes I also make errors. So, I think we should have a discussion, honestly, because होता क्या वही, the Strawmans come in, अरे नहीं नहीं, ये तो democracy थी ही, ऐसा नहीं है तो क्या हो जाएगा? You want to
Yeah.
validate to Anglophone media? If you want to, then please, that's not research.
That's
So,
that's the point.
yeah, you wish to say something. Okay, you do it first, then I'll do fast. Yeah.
Okay. Nothing. I just had to say we need to find what the roots of these systems are, the theories behind this, and all before we discuss anything. That's all I was saying.
Interesting. So the thing which I find it, and that is that's why I was saying that self-regulation matters, is that it actually is like an epitome which is needed. But even before that, I think what communities need is, if they're interested to go ahead with their own dynamics, I think at a local level a lot things can be done, because in the future of India is not basically a union government, the state governments, and then the district magistrate level things. It's not going to be that, because we all know that state governments will be more acting like reservoirs, due to reasons, because the Ministry of Cooperation and everything is there. So cooperation at a district level, at a janapada level, let's say, is something which is going to anyways happen. But of course we can shape it in that not, let's say, dharmic yahan pe nahi aata, indic way, which is reasonable. And of course, therein, I think our cooperation and our own activities of consultation as communities will lie through. Now, wo kaise hota hai, I can't tell, because there are specific examples. I need to see it somewhere on ground, then I can actually comment on it. And it's better for me not to comment on, because I can't stereotype. I mean, if I take my state, Uttar Pradesh, then the problem with Uttar Pradesh is that we love the Ram temple and Ram Janmabhoomi, which we should do, but we are still obsessed with pop culturism, and we don't focus on ki bhai, if we talk about Awadh, for example, Ayodhya, what is the dialect of Hindi for the region of Awadh or Audh? We don't focus on that. When we talk about Mathura, we ignore Braj Bhasha, which was very well popularized, and not just popularized, even well written by Surdas and many other authors, many other, I would say, the quote unquote bhakts of the Vaishnav faith. So, in that sense, I think when it comes to language, when it comes to your cultural assets, I think we need to really fix those things up very well. So let's then go ahead to a comment by Sagorika, and I think this is for GV Shukwarji again, I guess. So let's see it. Question is interesting: how to ensure that trusteeship and soft enforcement slash instruction breeds no supremacist attitudes while also remaining dynamic. I think you can take this better than me, and if I
It
wish
is,
to comment, I do. Otherwise, I don't.
yeah. This is very good. That's a, I mean, yeah. Of course, this is what we need to strive and struggle for answering these kind of questions. I think the old type Gandhian type of trusteeship is not going to happen, and its trusteeship will not be a structural reality. Not a, it will be a virtual reality that will need to be managed by the state through different policies. So there will be no physical custodian of wealth with absolute power, and everything else being subservient to that. That arguably probably did not exist in the past. Also, exactly like that, individuals with a lot of wealth acted like trustees because it benefited them personally also, to be like that, because all
Mhm.
rich, how did that happen? That happened because they lived within the community. Now community life mattered to them. It was a matter of real experience for them. There was no benefit in being an isolated individual in that era. So rich people acted like custodians because uh, they their community welfare was of personal importance to all of them. Otherwise, life would be impoverished for every single individual. But because individuals are completely out or loose from communities, a different kind of crisis is has emerged today. Um, I consider there are five kinds of experiences and performances that people indulge in. There is a performative experience, that is, we do something. When I write, I enjoy. That's why I write, not because I transform the world. That's secondary. And like that, all of us have our performative voice and experiences. Then we have our, consummatory experience. We pleasure, we eat, those kind of things, which are far more fundamental. Then, if these two alone were there, we would be barbarians, and we have an aesthetic experience that we've created. Even the intellectual indulgence, I would say, is a performative indulgence. It is I want to analyze, and hence I analyze, not because it is going to be it matters to the world. That is secondary. Actually, the aesthetic experience really balances these two intelligence so that we don't go overboard on these two. But we had realized that the ritualistic experiences can further control these three, and our yogic or sacred experiences can further control all four of them. So the five complex experiences, we designed and composed our life perfectly within a community, if possible within a community. So the performative aesthetic experience of even the rich depended on the community welfare. The ritualistic experience of the rich individual, dependent on the Kumbh Mela being there, is a matter of all of us attending Kumbh Mela is important even for the rich people. Rich people are not saying that I will alone go to Kumbh Mela and come back. That diminishes my experience. When I go to Kumbh Mela and see a sea of people, that enhances my experience. So I have a stake in organizing Kumbh Mela at a large scale personally. So I will spend money, I'll invest money. So that is the kind of trusteeship that we had. It was never a structural physical reality, but the community shaped the trusteeship sensitivity in people. Now, with community loosening, what can rebuild the sense of trusteeship is something that is not clear. So Sagarika ji, I do not have an answer. I know that if we give it as structural reality, all kinds of ills will come into that. It cannot be, even if the state is a trustee physically. We have seen what socialism does to the world. So the trusteeship has to be reimagined as a complex engagement between various entities, communities, and the industry and the state, and so on and so forth. And some new institutions have to emerge. That at, at end of the day, the industry or the rich or the or people with a lot of wealth, they have to they have to invest with a sense of their own personal experience also enhancing through that. Only then the sense of trusteeship will come. Charity as an egoistic indulgence, or as a performative indulgence alone will not get us there. So because the relationships are altered, because we need to imagine new institutions and new balance, our we are not able to say that how do we rebuild trusteeship. But what we can say is that in this reimagination, how do we realize trusteeship should be an important conversation. That's an important expectation for the design, but we need to begin the design yet.
Okay, so before Mac Hindu gives his honorable comments, I'll give a short comment on this. And I think I definitely agree on the portion of why physical trusteeship is not possible, and which is structural and physical, let's say. And that is why I think it came into my mind. I'm not saying that it because came into mind exactly, but I'm saying to some extent, because यही मुझे भी लगा that uh, what happens is that in our discourse we talk about अच्छा ठीक है ये institution बैठा दो committee बैठा दो काम हो गया, but we don't realize that top down institutions, if are done in that way, they don't help. Number one. Number two, let's look at from a realist perspective. जो भी डाउन टॉप या बॉटम अप ऑप institutions हैं, if we have those institutions, are they really sure of what they want to do? Because again, what happens is we have grifters, in a sense that, you know what, okay, we have our own feudal economic needs, and then you try to twist your own interest in basically harming the communities. It happens with people. And of course they can use the industrial dynamic or they may not use the industrial dynamic. It completely depends on that. This is something which is from a harm perspective, but I'm not, of course, not saying vigilance is the key here. I'm just saying vigilance is a completely different issue altogether. It's a practice which is, I'm not saying is structural. And I think because we have a tendency largely that we think, acha, theek hai, let's just outsource this to somebody. At the end of the day, all of it is human. So we have to understand that whatever human considerations we have at a virtual level, which is like a soft form of regulation, because there's a field called soft law which has emerged these days. It's not law, it's just ethical regulation, or I would say self-ethical regulation. So it happens a lot in technology, for example. Companies in, I have discussed with a lot of people in the EU about how people try to subvert the GDPR. So they said ki their AI Act cannot be enforced because, of course, the AI Act has flaws, but the complications of the GDPR still remain. So I think, of course, and in Europe also there are community concerns. Be it a different case that, of course, there are Christians and all of those, but of course, I'm saying that concerns. Okay, so I think
I'll
this is the
add
key.
one comment to as an
Sure.
answer to Radhika ji.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is that, we have always defined Purushartha for the individual.
Yeah.
But, if you look at a community, there is a Purushartha even for the community, which is a complex computation of Purushartha of individual entities. I feel
Okay.
modern institutions, if they adopt the philosophy of Purushartha and ask the question of what is the Purushartha dynamic, that what is our investment in the sacred, what is, how do we,
Hmm.
how will we ensure that, we are not crossing certain uh, lines in our intelligence uh, that will result in eroding. If we think of our own each institution thinking of its own longevity itself can bring back that. So
Hmm.
the we are not the way to reconfigure modern Indian life towards Indic is to say what is the purushartha of both the individuals and the institutions. Trusteeship can become a consequence of the asking those questions and reconfiguring.
Yeah. I think I would very much agree with that, in a sense that if we revitalize Purusharth in the best way possible, because I think it will itself, in common parlance, of course, there will be certain things ki हाँ ये trend है, but in practice and observation, and I would say even proceduralism, it would of course shape it up. And it's a bottom top thing, it's not a top down thing. So of course, I think we need to first realize that what is bottom top also. I'm not talking about, of course, we too are Makhindu. I'm just talking about, of course, people, because, as I said, I think it's similar to that funny discourse that, you know what, the state institution should teach Bhagavad Gita. Why parents should not? Like it's that funny discourse. But I'm not getting into that. For example, so I think Mac Hindu wishes to add something, and then let's go and fast so that we discuss the topics. I think some parts of relationship we are. So that's why I wish to take the question. Mac Hindu, go ahead.
Okay, so I was saying that as Aristotle in his Politics said, that the state is the most self-sufficient unit, and after securing life itself, it is made to secure a good life. And this good life in our tradition is, of course, the life where all the four Purusharthas could be achieved ideally, and if not that, the first three at least. So this is one thing that we know, that this thing itself can be a good starting point. Another thing is that what happens is that we must also know that our communities were restrained by all the five experiences that have been talked about just right now. That all the impulses of men, which are of greed and covetousness, crushed, or rather kept in control. They're not allowed to go out of control. That's another thing. So this way, our communities did not grow into such rapacious things that may be seen to some scale in our times. Even that is not that much as it would be in other communities outside India, possibly. So there's another thing, and the other thing is that Aristotle says this, that kings in India were more virtuous than their populace. So the thing is that the kings themselves were so high above the population, they could then do what they had more power over the population in essence, but even then they were restrained, as we all know it very well. And this restraint kept the orders going. Now, what has happened is that because the kings and the populace don't have much difference anymore into these times, the dynamic has been changed completely because of industry and everything else. So the dynamic then comes is of the oligarchs and the democrats. Now, what happens is that oligarchs always think that they want more than than all the masses, and the masses want equality. That they don't want to be left out. This is the dynamic that we are left with. Now, for Aristotle, what he has said is that if you're making an oligarchic institution, you should not be rapacious against the people. So he's in a sense restraining the rich from going this way. That though you are ruling, you should not be abusing your own power here, and you should invite the leaders of the masses and make them share in power as well. And in the same way, for the rich, it is said that you should not. For the democracies, it is told to the poor to not confiscate their belongings and everything, which is the mark of Marxism, if you all have understood it, from each according to his ability and so on. So what happens is that this is what is done here. That you have arrangements there too. In Aristotle's politics, we'll not go much into the details because we are going to be running out of time shortly. But even in an oligarchic and democratic institution, a mix of these two, you can still have restraints. If you can see that how others have tried to restrain the impulses and to also destroy factions because factions happen because of inequality, profit, honor, and many other reasons. Now, if you can prevent factions and prevent the covetousness, just like it was in the old times, even in this dynamic, you can sustain institutions. It's certainly possible. If you combine both of these features, you can do it. There are even more ways, like Aristotle says that you should have a democratic means of election, that from all you elect officials, you from all you elect judges. You don't restrain it to a small class because the small class will always speak in the mode of the few. That Machiavelli added in his discourses. In this way, you for not letting the supremacist attitudes take place, you allow a place to everyone there and endeavor to destroy factions as much as you can, restrain them with all the education that we have had since the ancient times. And when you combine this, you can, as such, keep the trusteeship going, whether that's virtual, real, whatever. That will be all.
That's really interesting, I would say. And I think, as far as the question of structural continuity is concerned, uh, I think I did a good job by basically sharing that pic, that graphic, because I think we discussed structural continuity in the beginning itself for the viewers who will
Yes,
binge watch this, most probably. I think so.
yes,
And I think the shorter the discourse on this and the specific it is, the better it is, rather than too much elaboration and too much digression slash exaggeration. So I
yes,
would have to conclude this session with utmost sincerity as well as satisfaction that we had a good discourse this lovely morning. And I
yes.
wish Makar Sankranti slash Pongal to everyone slash other festivals. I can't remember the names right now, but greetings to everyone. I think for me, I think Makar Sankranti begins today. I don't know, maybe I think so. My region. So I would celebrate, of course, with kites and everything. But yeah, um, uh, I would say that this is the end of the third episode of Indus Think. Tomorrow at 5 p.m., I will be coming up with a very interesting trilogue with very interesting people, including Amrit. Sorry, Amrit. I said Amrita. So he was saying why you are using Amrita. So let Amrit. And tomorrow we will be discussing about the possibility of any alliance, quote unquote, or any partnership between neo paganism and Indic faiths and Indic cultural paradigms. Let's see. I have no views on that again because मुझे कुछ tested try चाहिए. I want samples. I want case study. I just can't comment on everything, and I think we all should go for something nuanced. I think that's something which helps everyone, and I think it makes the discourse lively. So we end this session of Indus Think. Thank you so much for watching. Please do Bing watch it a lot. Share this video. I hope people who are interested in GV Shukmarji's paper Shri Siti Lay and his upcoming papers on Indica today or Indic Academy, let's say, Indic today, yeah, Indic today. Um, Please go through them. They're very interesting, and I really wish that if people are really interested in civilizational discourse, they go for constructive efforts where they're done are not grifters but literally contributing in a reasonable way. You can do in any field. You can do in any field. It's not that हाँ ठीक है इसी में करना है. Don't go by too much of rhetoric if you're really aware of what happens. And I think there will be times when people will converge. It's just that maturity in discourse has not come yet. I think so. Very few people have that. So I think it will take time. Let it happen. I hope so that it does. So I end this session. Over to all and take care. Stay safe.